Okay, welcome everyone. We are delighted to have you with us today. My name is Christopher Phillips. We're going to get started promptly today. As people are joining, just again would remind anyone to just take a moment to introduce yourself. In the chat, some of you have already done so. Thank you. This helps us as we understand who's here, but just take a minute to share your role, where you're located, and if you'd like, why you chose to be a part of this series. Um, With that, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This is the second webinar in a series of 6. Today it's titled Powering Access Through Systemic Action. We'll do a quick recap of webinar 1 in just a few slides for anyone who missed that or needs a refresher. But today, as we look at our kind of logistics of the webinar on the next slide, we encourage anybody as you go through or feel free to reach out to our program assistant, Natalie Cardenas, in the chat if you have any problems or need any help. Captions are provided for this session. You can find that in your Zoom bar there below to just click on the show captions and you'll see those. Then also just would remind everybody you can go and download the slide deck, and then the recording will be available tomorrow at the URL bit.ly/QI-webinar2. There's also a QR code there on the screen if you want to go to that link that way. And as mentioned, Natalie always does a great job with our recordings. Plan on seeing those hopefully later tomorrow or by Monday at the latest on that. So, and then as we go forward, a couple things about our communication. Please do use the Zoom chat there to respond to any of our prompts throughout the session today. Communicate with other attendees, or maybe you'll hear something that prompts you to share a resource, something you've been working on. The chat is there and available. We'll keep an eye on that throughout the session today. And then also there is a react button in Zoom that we would encourage you to use to raise your hand, and you can come on mic if you want to ask any questions, or you can also ask any questions you have in the chat. We'll hopefully have some time at the end to address any questions we don't get to throughout the session. And then, of course, would also encourage you to think of any questions or concerns or additional conversations you'd love to bring to our office hours that we'll be having next week. Today's facilitators, there's a bunch of us here today. You can see NCADEMI in front of all of our names in the chat or the participants list. Jenna Fallbush is our technical assistant specialist. Myself, also a technical assistant specialist. Cynthia Curry is our project director. Kristen Perez-Rickles here as a technical assistant specialist. And then I don't think Rob is with us today, actually. But that's our crew who are here. We'll stand ready to answer any questions that you might have. And just as a little bit of a recap as we go back, we went over this last week. This is a great presentation of kind of the work that we're doing here. Again, this is webinar 2 in a series of 6, really intended to help build you or your team's understanding of accessible digital education systems based on the NCADEMI quality indicators for the provision and use of accessible materials. So last time in webinar 1, we planted some seeds and just with an overview of the series and kind of give a little bit of background around why this is so important. Today, we'll be introducing the quality indicators, as well as going over a tool that can help you and your organization kind of determine where you're at with your readiness to do this work. And then looking ahead, that we hope you'll join us for future webinars. In the next one, we'll be looking at quality indicators around accessible digital materials, really around kind of looking at what we can do to make sure that digital content is accessible from the beginning. Moving ahead to webinar 4, we'll look at quality indicators for accessible formats. What are those important things we can do to make sure we're providing high quality accommodations in a timely manner. Webinar 5, we'll have a good foundation at that point. We'll be looking at some self-assessment tools that are there and available for you to help you along this journey to kind of look at and evaluate how you're doing. And then in the final one, we'll kind of bring everything together and talk about some future opportunities to participate in some targeted technical assistance for anybody who wants to continue along on that journey with us. And continue to grow that plant, maybe creating a whole greenhouse full of beautiful flowers. So that's kind of where we're at and where we're headed with this. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the microphone over to Jenna, who's going to go over and review a little bit what we went over from webinar 1.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. It is my pleasure to talk to you a little bit about what we talked about in webinar 1, which was a couple Thursdays ago now. So in that first session, as Christopher was talking about, we were planting the seeds for this series by providing an overview of the successions and optional office hours. And there's been a link shared in the chat to that webinar recording resources page. And there's a QR code on the right-hand side of this screen as well, if you want to access that at any time, or please share. So in that first session, we provided that overview of the series. We also defined the term accessible. We talked about why digital accessibility matters by sharing a really impactful story of the barriers created by an inaccessible online science simulation for a blind high schooler named Rebecca. So I definitely recommend going back and listening to that, or checking out the resources on the student stories that's shared on the resources page. We also took a poll about who is responsible for ensuring accessibility, to ultimately understand that it is each and every one of our responsibilities here today and in last week's webinar and in our agency when we're really thinking about accessible spaces and digital content. We all have a part to play. And last but not least, we provided participants some suggestions for getting that accessibility conversation started with colleagues and admin. So we will also continue to support your accessibility conversations today with some more calls to action. Now, as we're moving this discussion into the quality indicators, we're going to start by looking at the legal foundations for accessible educational materials. And we want to take another poll. So I am thinking about who here in this room is hearing about ADA Title II in your agency. So some answers are already starting to come in. We do know that there are some deadlines approaching as you're answering. April 2026, so next year, for state education agencies and larger school districts, we need to conform to the WCAG 2.1 level A standard. And then in April of 2027, there is a conformance deadline for the smaller agencies and school districts. So we've got some great participation here. And I think we can go ahead and share out what we're seeing here. So you'll notice that about, a third of you aren't really hearing much, not a word at all. There's been 15% hearing some buzz or some hubbub. Discussions are beginning, or conversations are picking up, and that was 30%, and then about 22% say some changes are already being made, which is great to hear. That near a quarter of those that participated, which was about 72%, did say you're seeing some changes already. So that's super exciting, because what we know as we've been providing technical assistance over the past year, it's clear that awareness of ADA Title II varies super widely across states and school districts. So there's no judgment here. Thanks for being honest. We're just excited to have you here and to move forward. All right, back to those laws. So we're talking about the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II, and the IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We know that when a student needs accessible materials, there are two pathways by which they may be provided. So one pathway is to provide digital materials produced to be accessible from the very beginning. So that means digital accessibility is totally prioritized agency-wide, from professional development and job responsibilities to your budgets and to your workflows. And the other pathway is to provide materials rendered in one or more accessible formats. And when I say accessible formats, I'm talking about formats such as Braille, digital text, audio files, or large print, for students with disabilities whose IEP teams determined that an accessible format or formats are needed for equal access to the students' educational materials. And now for some more participation, I have a couple fill in the blank questions for those of you who are here with some background knowledge. So if you would just use the chat to reply. Legally speaking, when we provide materials that are accessible from the beginning for everyone, which law are we referencing? So thinking about digital accessibility from everyone, is that ADA Title II or IDEA? I see some ADAs and Title IIs coming in, and I appreciate that feedback. Awesome. That's right. ADA Title II is the law we're talking about here. And then if we shift gears over to the right-hand side of this screen, when we're adapting or retrofitting materials into an accessible format or more than one for our eligible students, which law are we talking about now? And by yep, there it is, IDEA. Thank you for those chats. I appreciate it. And so, yeah, just by process of elimination, we know that's the law that we're talking about. So speaking of IDEA, it's probably what most of us here are the most familiar with as the nation's special education law. It is a law that mandates a free and appropriate public education to eligible students with disabilities. It's a law that requires state and local education agencies, SEAs and LEAs, to provide accessible formats when needed by a student with a disability. And it also established the National Instructional Materials Accessibility Standard, or NIMAS, and the National Instructional Materials Access Center, NIMAC. So for more information on those two, we actually have a past webinar where there was an interview with two individuals from the NIMAC. And we've shared that link in the chat. I highly recommend it as a resource for learning more about how NIMAS and NIMAC support schools with providing accessible formats in a timely manner. Shifting gears over to that ADA Title II. So we know the ADA came into law in 1990, and it more broadly is a law against discrimination and protecting individuals from that discrimination. Now, the new rule under Title II, which was signed into law just in April of 24, this law is applying specifically to state and local governments, including our SEAs and LEAs. And it's taking things a bit further by requiring or mandating proactive digital accessibility in public education. So some things to keep in mind about ADA Title II is that it does require that we follow a technical standard. And I mentioned this briefly a little bit ago. The technical standard is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG WCAG 2.1 level AA. There are also some compliance deadlines that I also talked about, and you can find the details of those compliance deadlines in the ADA fact sheet linked up here at the top of the screen in the title there, and also shared in the chat. And finally, there are some exceptions to the mandate that you'll find in that fact sheet. And I highly recommend taking a peek at that to better understand where your agency falls in the compliance and what those exceptions are. Some examples today of digital materials that are required to conform include, but are really not limited to the ones on this slide, but we wanted to highlight some examples that probably feel very familiar to you. And that's websites and digital textbooks, online learning platforms, apps and tools, videos and slide presentations, and teacher created and curated materials. So stop and think about that for a moment. Because when we're talking about teacher created and curated, that means educators have to understand what makes digital materials accessible, both to create accessible content and to recognize it when selecting resources online. For a quick comparison of these two laws side by side, I highly recommend taking a look at our resource ADA Title II and IDEA at a glance, shared in the chat and linked on this slide. It's something you could print out and maybe pass out to colleagues as well, so that they can keep this information straight in their minds, especially if they're newer to their role in education, or maybe are in gen ed and not as familiar with IDEA as a special educator. So bookmark that site or print it out. And you'll again be seeing that this resource is part of this week's calls to action, which you'll learn more about in a little bit. And now that we've gone through a quick overview, high-level overview of these two laws, I am going to turn the mic over to Cynthia to introduce us to these quality indicators.
Great, thanks, Jenna, and thanks for that superb overview of ADA and Title II and IDEA in 10 minutes. That was really comprehensive, but succinct and organized, and I love all of the resources that are available to help further support people in understanding those two laws as they relate to accessible materials. So with that backdrop of what digital accessibility means, why it's so crucial in education, and the related laws that apply to schools, it's my privilege to introduce the quality indicators for the provision and use of accessible materials in pre-K-12 systems, or we'll simply refer to them as the quality indicators. So we have you all out of here rather than staying for an extra hour for every time we say the full title, we'll just refer to these as quality indicators. This resource is designed to help your agency or your school take specific actions to create more accessible digital learning environments based on the laws, IDEA and ADA Title II. Thinking about those at the same time as the floor, those are the requirements. You'll find that the quality indicators really incorporate a lot of additional actions that go beyond just compliance, which we know educators are striving for. We want more inclusive learning environments. We want to make sure that we are paying attention to a lot more aspects than just technical access or functional access and accommodations, and paying attention to the minimum accessibility standards. So a little bit about the quality indicators, a little about the history and the background. There's a QR code to the quality indicators shown on this slide, and there's a link to them in the chat to our website. So a few high-level points to make that provide important history and background about the quality indicators. First, for those of you who know QUIET, or the quality indicators for assistive technology, the quality indicators for providing accessible materials should be familiar to you, or feel familiar, because they were originally modeled after QUIET over 15 years ago. Two of the original authors of QUIET, Joy Zabala and Diana Carl, applied the QUIET framework, to the provision of accessible formats in the mid-2000s. They did that to help states meet the new NIMAS and NIMAC provisions of IDEA 2004. So when IDEA 2004 was passed, the last time it was reauthorized, award to Bruce Alter for putting the exact date of the reauthorization of IDEA in the chat when responding to Jenna's question about ADA Title II versus IDEA. When NIMAS and NIMAC were added, that's when there needed to be some technical assistance provided to states and school districts to understand how do we provide accessible formats in a timely manner. So there was funding that was provided for that technical assistance. Joy Zabala and Diana Carl developed this concept of supporting states and school districts in understanding the law by providing the quality indicators. Having been leaders on QUIET for several years before that, they adapted that model, and the first version of the quality indicators specific to accessible materials was born. So since then, 25 states in a series of technical assistance cohorts that have been federally funded by the Office of Special Education Programs have helped the quality indicators evolve over time, right up through the current version that NCADEMI published last month and that we're providing technical assistance in this webinar series is based on. If you know that your state has contributed to the use and the implementation of the quality indicators, would you please share that in the chat? Enter the name of your state and any additional comments you want to share. It's so important that we honor the history of the quality indicators And if you don't know if your state has been involved, there's a full history of the development process for the quality indicators, as well as a timeline available on our website. And states that have participated in the development of the quality indicators over time, those are available in the glossary. Kind of what I know, there are people here whose states have been involved in the development of the quality indicators over time. If you're in a state and you know that you have been involved, or your state has been involved in the quality indicators, if you want to mention that in the chat. Yep, so it doesn't necessarily need to be the person, but if you know that your state has been involved, this may be something that your state was involved with. I'm from Maine. I was on the Maine AIM community that was part of the first 15 state cohort of the AIM coalition. So that was a long time ago. That was about 15 years ago. Here they come. Ohio absolutely was part of the first part of the AIM cohort. Indiana, Oregon, absolutely. North Carolina. Okay, some other states, I'll just, Louisiana was there, Maryland, Michigan, if we have anybody, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Utah, Vermont, Wisconsin, Wyoming, West Virginia. So a lot of states have been involved in the development of these quality indicators, which has really kicked the tires on them and gives us confidence that here in the current version, which is about version 3 of the quality indicators, we know that they are that they've really been validated over time. All right, so those of you who may have a history with the quality indicators, you may have looked at them in the past, over the years. Who has taken a look at the current version? A, if not yet, B, if you've skimmed them, and C, if you've taken a deep dive. Okay, we can share the results of this poll at this point. So a little bit more than 50% of you have skimmed the quality indicators, but 42% have yet to take a look at them, and one of you has taken, or at least one of you of those who've responded to the poll, have taken a deep dive. All right, so let's go ahead and go over to the NCADEMI website and take a look at these. We won't have a chance for a deep dive today, but we'll skim them and I'll provide you with an overview of how to navigate the site. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share. All right, so here is NCADEMI's homepage. If you're looking to get to the quality indicators from the homepage, which is ncademi.org, you go to the resources and we have a drop down that will take you right to the quality indicators landing page. Here on the right on the landing page is the answer to the question, what are the quality indicators? Well, they explain the actions states and school districts take to ensure students with and without disabilities can use their learning materials. So really straightforward. Also on this page is some information about why the quality indicators matter, with some personas of students who require accessibility in order to participate in the general education curriculum. And also on this page, you'll find a download to the resource as a PDF. So if you're old school and you like to have a downloadable PDF with all the information about the quality indicators that you can also navigate on our website, please take advantage of the PDF. You can get to the 2 sets of quality indicators right from the landing page. I really like what our website team developed over on the right side with the sidebar navigation. It has the 4 different sections for navigating the quality indicator information on our website. Using the quality indicators, this provides some background information about what are the key foundations to keep in mind about using the quality indicators and how they were developed and the purpose for their use, adapting them for your setting. So we were keeping in mind, although the quality indicators, which is this next section, who should use them. The audience for the quality indicators are state and school district teams, but we also know that even in those two categories, there's a lot of variation. So under the using the quality indicators, you will find some acknowledgement to how the quality indicators can be adapted for your own setting. Remembering that these are, which I don't think we've actually explicitly said during webinar 1 or webinar 2, all of NCADEMI's resources, or may have in webinar 1 actually, all of NCADEMI's resources are Creative Commons licensed. They're openly free for you to use. And what we want to happen is that you actually adapt them for your own purpose. So we know we've taken a pass. We're confident that what we've developed is valid and reliable. It's evidence-based. But we also know that every setting is going to be different. So we're looking forward to finding out how you adapt them for your own purpose. Under the two sets of indicators section, you will find some background on the two different sets, very similar foundation that Jenna shared when she was talking about the overview of IDEA and ADA Title II and why you would want to choose either set of the quality indicators. And then there's this quality indicators comparison table that Jenna developed to help states and district teams think about, to kind of at a glance, what are the distinctions between these two laws specific to accessible materials. We know you can find a lot of information on the web or asking AI, what's the difference between ADA Title II and IDEA, but you won't necessarily get information that's specific to the provision of accessible materials. So that's what this table does. And then there's a decision-making guide with 3 different paths to help you determine in our setting, what are we going to prioritize? We know we need to do better in providing accessible materials for students with disabilities. Are we looking at providing accessible formats as an accommodation as a priority right now? Are we looking at providing accessible digital materials from the beginning and prioritizing that? Or do we want to take a comprehensive approach and try to working on both, provide the provision of accessible formats and digital accessible materials simultaneously and in parallel? We know there's a sense of urgency for both. As Jenna mentioned, there is a conformance timeline for states and school districts to meet regarding ADA Title II. And of course, the provision of accessible formats has been part of IDEA since 2004. So we're here to help with how to manage that urgency and making sure that progress is being made. And that's the most important thing to keep in mind, is progress and continuous improvement, which is how the quality indicators have been designed. Under the development process, this is where you'll find the history of how the quality indicators originated many years ago, and the contribution of many states, cohorts of states over time, with the development timeline. In the PDF, there's actually a timeline that's a little bit easier to read. And there's also within the glossary, if there are new terms for you on our website related to the quality indicators, come to the glossary and see if you find it. In the PDF, there are actually links that jump to the glossary. If there's a term that you recommend that we add to the glossary, please let us know. And it's also in here that you will find for each of the cohorts of states, technical assistance cohorts of states that have worked on the quality indicators, you'll find a list of those states here in the glossary. Okay, and then in the menu, next, after using the quality indicators are listed. So AF, that's the quality indicators for accessible formats. DM, that's the quality indicators for digital materials. And we gave those distinct notations because when we were first developing the quality indicators in partnership with a cohort of states, we weren't sure whether we wanted to combine the quality indicators into one set or whether to make them distinct. We decided in consultation with our technical assistance recipients to go ahead and create 2 different sets. And so we made the notation AF for those quality indicators that are specific to providing accessible formats. When you see DM, that's referring to our quality indicators for providing accessible digital materials. Each set has 7 quality indicators. These are the quality indicators for accessible formats. You'll recognize some of the terms here in our guidelines that really relate specifically to accessible formats. But in each set, there are 4 quality indicators that are the same. In both sets, you'll find commitment from leadership, you'll find training and support, using data to inform continuous improvement, and the need for a sustainability plan. Then within each set, there are these guidelines that are specific to the law, or the practices that are specific to whether it's accessible formats or accessible digital materials. So we have guidelines for states and districts to coordinate with the NIMAC, guidelines for including accessible formats as part of a student's IEP, and guidelines for acquiring accessible formats from accessible media producers or from other sources. Then under digital material quality indicators, very similar, very consistent setup. You'll see the same 4 quality indicators that mirror the accessible formats: commitment from leadership, training and support, collecting data, having a sustainability plan. But the guidelines here are different for digital materials. Guidelines for procuring accessible digital materials and technology, so working with vendors, quality indicators for supporting teachers and other staff with selecting accessible materials, and guidelines for helping educators and other staff create accessible materials. So let's take a look at one of these. We'll go into commitment from leadership. So this is quality indicator 1 under digital materials. If we were in the accessible format quality indicators, this would be AF1. They're similar, but they're going to be different. So even though there's overlap with the same quality indicator 1, commitment from leadership, it's a little bit different context, and a little bit different content for each set. So the statement is very brief and to the point. In each of these quality indicators, there's an intent that conveys what's the meaning and the purpose for the quality indicator. And then there's a series of critical components. And these help with understanding what are the pieces that need to be in place in order for the team to support the agency in meeting the intent of the quality indicator. So here, under having a commitment from a leadership team, the need for a steering committee is made clear. There's some recommendations listed for who should be part of that steering committee when we're talking about providing digital accessibility from the beginning. And then what I really like, Christopher's idea here was to take our self-assessment tables that are part of our self-assessment tool, which is a topic of webinar 5. His idea was to take that self-assessment table, the matrices, and to include them with each critical component so that people can see, as you're browsing and exploring the quality indicators, you can get a better sense of what the implementation of the critical component looks like in practice, and just helps with illustrating the critical component beyond just the different factors that get incorporated. Having a statement of commitment is included as a critical component under commitment from leadership, followed by implementation stages, clear role expectations. And this isn't for the steering committee. These clear role expectations are for staff and administrators across the system. And then beyond the quality indicators for digital materials, we move into the implementation resources for these, because we know we can provide quality indicators, but if we don't provide some support with implementing them, how does this work in a system? It's not going to, there won't be as much uptake, and they won't have an impact. So we developed a readiness protocol, which Kristen is going to introduce in a moment, and a self-assessment tool, which is actually, there are 2 self-assessment tools. There's one specific to the quality indicators for digital materials, and a second for the quality indicators for accessible formats. Those will be topics in later webinars. Okay, let's go back to the slide deck. All right, so just a reminder, this is a couple of screenshots from the website. As you're thinking about those, we know that we knew that when we developed 2 different sets of quality indicators, helping and supporting teams with deciding how do you either merge these, or how do you make a determination of what to focus on for continuous improvement. We knew that would be an area of need for technical assistance. So don't forget, we have this quality indicator comparison table to help you understand both sets of quality indicators, and the decision-making guide that will help with informing where do we want to start with making improvements in our system. And speaking of that, not to add any pressure to anyone in this moment, but if you know which set of quality indicators your agency is interested in working with, we'd love to know that via this poll. So is it that are you leaning toward, or does the sense of urgency for your agency lean toward digital materials? That would be A. Is it accessible formats, which is B? Are you thinking about a way to prioritize both sets? Or are you at the point yet you're not sure? And there is no judgment here. We're just so glad that you're here and learning about the quality indicators and some steps that can be taken. Okay, we can go ahead and share this poll. And we have a number. So the majority are looking at both, which is fantastic. And then about 25% of you are looking at digital materials, 5% accessible formats, and about a third of you are not sure where you're going to start, but you're here and we're really excited about that. So without further ado, I'm going to be just delighted to pass the baton over to Kristen, who will introduce the readiness protocol.
Yes, thank you, Cynthia. I am really happy to be here talking with you all. Before I move on, I just want to acknowledge Stacy's question in the chat around specific timelines for each state to show progress towards accessible materials. The question was, are there? And I will go ahead, Cynthia.
Oh, I was just going to, Jenna, do you want to repeat? I think that was, you may mention that in the overview of ADA Title II and the IDEA.
So when it comes to conformance timelines, there are guidelines, well, conformance timelines beyond guidelines. For larger state agencies or school districts, the conformance date is April of 2026. And for smaller agencies or more like rural school districts, we're looking at April of 2027. And if you're thinking about accessibility regarding like quality indicators progress, there will be, some targeted technical assistance provided by NCADEMI that will be explored later in this webinar series as well, where we'll talk more about how to work with us and how to maybe target your progress within your own agency.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up. I was just writing it in the chat, but it's easier to talk. I'm not a very fast typer. So that to quantify that, I think it's up to for state governments and local governments with a census of up to 49,999 people. It's April of 2026. For smaller school districts, that would be, or probably relatively not small, but no, I'm sorry. So up to 49,999. Those are the districts that have until 2027. 50,000 people and over in the census, that is 2026.
And just one quick note on that, there are existing laws already require accessibility. This is just kind of referring to some additional guidance from the Justice Department that will likely come to your question, Susan, with some additional conformance. That question, kind of what are the repercussions of being out of compliance? I think that's a question that we don't exactly know the answer to, other than, we've just heard that it will open the door for, more complaints and potential litigation. And so it's all about risk management. And that may be something we can return to either later today or in office hours.
Yes. Thank you so much, Christopher, and thank you everybody for the questions in the chat. We will get to those either at the end of this webinar or during office hours. We can discuss more fully, as Christopher mentioned. And Heather, thank you for your response to your colleague in the chat as well, regarding having at least one district sue due to compliance issues in 2024. Okay, so the readiness protocol is something, thank you, Christopher. It was added into the chat, so you all have access to it. The readiness protocol is our way of supporting you all in determining whether or not your agency or organization has the essential foundational readiness or capacity or support or funding in order to actually dig deep and do implementation of the quality indicators well in a way that will be sustained. So both IDEA and ADA Title II are things that you have to implement, and you have to implement based on conformance timelines. And so the readiness protocol is not telling you whether or not you should or should not implement the quality indicators. It is really an opportunity for you to explore where maybe your agency needs additional support, or where you all need to access additional individuals or resources or funding in order to make your implementation really meaningful. So just a little bit about the implementation readiness tool. You will hear it called a few different things on the website. It is called the Readiness Assessment Readiness Tool and the Hexagon Tool. The reason it is partially called the Hexagon Tool is because it was adapted from NERN's Hexagon Tool that was developed. The National Implementation Research Network is NERN, and they developed this Hexagon tool to help organizations evaluate their readiness to implement a wide array of initiatives. What we have done at NCADEMI is split the Hexagon tool into practice indicators, which include evidence, usability, and supports, and agency indicators, which will encompass the need, the fit, and the capacity of the agency to implement. Because this was adapted with a very specific set of practices or practice in mind, the quality indicators, there is already a large amount of information for you in the areas of evidence, usability, and supports. The ones that will require maybe additional data or resources, or for you to dig into more fully and contextualize for your agency, will be those agency indicators. And we'll talk a little bit more about the structure very quickly. So like I said, evidence, usability, and supports includes information preloaded for you, so to speak. It is embedded within each of those sections already. The goal in the discussion and the review of each of those sections is really to ensure consistent team understanding and consistent team agreement around the evidence, usability, and available supports, and whether or not you all need additional supports or additional information on evidence and usability, how you and your agency are communicating the evidence and the usability to appropriate stakeholders. And so this is really around consistent team understanding. It is my recommendation that this would be the part that you start with to get everybody kind of level set on the same page, and you can identify any misunderstandings or misconceptions really early on. The agency indicators, including population need, fit, and capacity, do not have information preloaded for you because it is very contextual to your agency. We do include outlined prompts for discussion, and you have the criteria for scoring. That's also in the practice indicators as well. But this is really an opportunity for your agency and your team to identify and define contextual areas for readiness improvement. If you find that you do not have all of the capacity needed, right? You don't have all of the resources needed in order to do implementation really well, even with the support from NCADEMI and from other organizations. This is an opportunity for your agency to identify some mitigating strategies. What other information do we need? What other individuals do we need at the table with us? And how can we access those additional supports? Okay. When you, in order to access the protocol, there was the link in the chat for you. And then just as Cynthia showed on the website, when you go into implementation on the resources page, it will have for you the Hexagon Readiness tool, and you can download it in a Word document. The intent of it being in a Word document is so that you all can take your notes and provide your score directly on the page. And it can be a useful tool for you in conversation with others and in your team meetings. So before you dig into the readiness tool, we do recommend that you determine which need will be addressed as you're evaluating readiness to implement that area. So you all said, most of you said that you have an idea of where your agency would like to move, either in accessible digital educational materials through Title II, provision and use of accessible formats in IDA, or both. For those of you who are not sure, I highly recommend you also access that decision-making guide and have conversations, continued conversations with others in your agency to discuss what the priority or essential needs are within your agency. Please keep in mind that you can assess readiness for both ADA Title II and IDEA implementation, quality indicator implementation. You are not committed. If you assess readiness in both areas, this is not committing you to immediately jumping into implementation in both areas. It's just good data for you to see where do we have better readiness, where could we start, where is maybe the low-hanging fruit, while we mitigate some of these readiness concerns for the other implementation area. As you prepare to use the readiness protocol, we encourage you to look at all of the questions within the within each of the sections, all of the discussion questions. Identify what data you need to gather in order to have really quality discussions and to make determinations, any other resources, and then any team members you might need, particularly those that you have not thought of before. So this is just an example of the of a couple of questions within the agency indicators, within the practice indicators for need. So what accessibility challenges are currently affecting students with disabilities? What data do you have that could speak to this question? Make sure you bring that to the table. What other individuals in your agency might have an additional perspective relevant to this question? Those people should be part of the conversation with you. And so make sure you are taking an opportunity to read through the readiness, gather any needed materials to have really meaningful discussions prior to your scoring of readiness. And I think we will just go ahead and jump ahead in honor of your time.
Thank you, Kristen. So as we look ahead, we just want to mention a couple of things. So glad to have everybody here in this webinar, but the real work obviously happens in between the webinars. And if you'll take a look at that link that'll be coming shortly on just on that same webinar page, towards the bottom there are some call to actions that we would encourage you to look at. So ways that you can share some of that with colleagues and just yeah, some things you can do to kind of as far as takeaways with this webinar as you go forward. We do really want to just make sure to remind everybody about the office hours. I will just mention we didn't get as much participation as we hoped last week, and so if you do sign up for those or take a minute to show up, you will have a lot of us kind of at the ready to kind of talk about any specific questions you have, or even look at, how we might implement and discuss some of these ideas from the webinar today in your specific setting, whatever that might be. And again, we'll send out the link to the office hour registration and a couple of the reminders in a follow-up email. Those are coming up on Tuesday, October 28th, 4 p.m. Eastern, and then Wednesday, October 29th, at 6 p.m. Eastern, whatever time would work best for you. Would remind you, just coming up, webinar 3, digital educational materials quality indicator, digital educational material quality indicators, coming up on November 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And then lastly, just kind of go over a few just ways to make sure you keep in touch with NCADEMI, our website, ncademy.org. Always, you're welcome to reach out to us, ask any questions about this or other things kind of related to this topic. NCADEMI@usu.edu. Call us at 435-554-8213. And that's voice or text. Follow us on LinkedIn. That link is in the chat. And also be sure to sign up for our newsletter. Lastly, these are just a couple of slides that we'll leave as they are, just to mention kind of background information. We've taken up most of our time today, so we won't have a lot of time for Q&A. We'll stick around a little bit later for anyone who wants to or has follow-up questions. But again, really would encourage everyone to sign up for those office hours next week and bring any of your questions there. Thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate your involvement and participation on this journey with us. Thank you.